Welcome to Heart of the Shepherd as we begin a new study in the book of 1 Samuel. I invite you to open your Bible with me to 1 Samuel chapter 1. The title of our devotional, Hannah, a testimony of faith, love, and sacrifice. I do invite you to open your Bible to the book of 1 Samuel. Now, our chronological Bible reading schedule does bring us to the book of Samuel, which is in one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. Now, in this volume, we will uncover a rich history that marks the transition from the time of the judges to the onset of the monarchy in Israel. Now, the first chapter of 1 Samuel concludes an era when judges ruled Israel and introduces the age of kings. Now remember that God rules through his law and commandments. He chose Israel to protect and share his message with all people, starting with Israel. And the judges taught the people about the will and the word of the Lord through the law given in the covenant at Sinai. Now, unfortunately, the failure of the priesthood prompted the people to demand a king. Now, Eli, the high priest of Israel, along with his corrupt sons Hophni and Phinehas, for Samuel 1, 2, and 4, both Eli and his sons brought disgrace to the priesthood. Now, their sins provoked the people in chapter 8 to ask for a king to judge us like all the nations. Well, let's consider 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now, we begin with the first 8 verses, what I would describe as Hannah's grievance, and that was that she was barren. Now, several notable figures appear in today's study. There was Elkanah, who belonged to the tribe of Levi and was a descendant of Kohath, the son of Levi. Now, Elkanah was a devout Jew and adhered to the law, going up yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh, where the tabernacle was located, as well as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the same Elkanah had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Now, Peninnah had children, having borne her husband sons and daughters, according to chapter 1, verse 2 and 4. However, Hannah had no children, according to verse 2, and although her husband loved her, she bore the shame of the culture and the sorrow of being a barren woman. And she was treated spitefully by Elkanah's other wife. Well, year after year, Hannah traveled to Shiloh with her husband and family, weeping and fasting before the Lord, and praying that he would open her womb and give her a son. Despite having the assurance of Elkanah's love, her heart ached because she was barren. Now, Hannah's prayer and vow to the Lord are recorded in verses 9 through 18. Now, Hannah vowed that if the Lord gave her a son, she would dedicate him to serve him at the tabernacle. And she promised her son would be a Nazirite, verse 10 and 11, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And she prayed to the Lord, speaking to him from her heart, and only her lips moved, we read, but her voice was not heard. And therefore Eli, the high priest, thought she had been drunken, according to verse 13. And thus Eli rebuked her, judged that she had too much wine, and commanded her to put away thy wine from thee, in verse 14. Hannah replied to the high priest, saying, No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Verse 16. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, that is a worthless, immoral, wicked woman. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. We'll see in the sincerity of Hannah's confession, Eli, in verse 17, assured her that the Lord had heard her prayer and would answer her prayers. Hannah, in verse 18, then left the tabernacle, no longer despondent, but believing that the Lord would show her grace and grant her a son. Well, in verse 19 through 23, we have God's answer to Hannah's prayer. Here we have recorded Samuel's conception, birth, and nurturing. And so we read that Elkanah and his family returned to their home in Ramah, and the Lord remembered Hannah's prayer. In God's perfect timing, verse 19 and 20, she conceived a son and named him Samuel, which means heard of God, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. The following year, Elkanah prepared to go up to Shiloh for his annual pilgrimage, as was his custom. However, Hannah requested to stay home and not go to the tabernacle until her son was no longer nursing. She knew, verse 22 and 23, that the day would come when she would fulfill her vow to the Lord and leave Samuel to minister at Shiloh with Eli, the high priest. Then verse 24 through 28 records Hannah dedicating Samuel to the Lord. Now Hannah was a woman of faith who honored her vow to the Lord. And we read that after she had weaned her son, probably around 3 years old, the day came when she took Samuel and went with Elkanah to present offerings and sacrifices to the tabernacle. Therefore we read, verse 24, Hannah brought Samuel unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. Now after sacrificing a bullock, Elkanah and Hannah brought their son to Eli, and she reminded the high priest in verse 26, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. And then in verse 28, in an act of faith and sacrificial love, Hannah confessed, I have lent, that is, I have given him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. Well, closing thoughts for chapter 1. Elkanah and Hannah's example of faith, prayer, and sacrifice has inspired the saints of the Lord throughout the centuries. Hannah's faith was clearly demonstrated when she offered her son to the Lord before his conception. She was confident by faith that the Lord heard and would surely answer her prayers. Only mothers can genuinely understand the heartache when Hannah left her son at Shiloh, especially given the wickedness of Eli's sons. And she fulfilled her vow to the Lord, and he, the Lord, honored her faith and sacrifice. She would be blessed with 3 sons and 2 daughters in addition to Samuel. Well, before we conclude our study, I encourage parents and grandparents to take a moment to pray and dedicate your children and grandchildren to the Lord. After all, every child is a special gift from Him. Well, thank you for following Heart of a Shepherd. We will continue tomorrow in our study of 1 Samuel. God bless.